Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Today's episode of Crime Redefined is sponsored by MBA DNA Consulting, LLC, located in downtown Los Angeles. Renowned forensic DNA consultant Mehul Anjaria bridges science and law by helping his attorney and inmate clients with complicated DNA issues in criminal and civil cases with the highest stakes. Check out mbadnaconsulting.com for more information and follow on Twitter at MBA Consult. I'm Dion Mitchell here with Mehul Anjaria. Welcome to our 20th episode of Crime Redefined. On this episode, we have something a little different and very special for you. We are speaking with world-renowned professional psychic medium, medical intuitive, and paranormal investigator from Ohio, Beth Deering.
Well, hopefully everybody has listened to our episode When Genealogy Reveals Evil, in which we spoke with Jeff Mudgett, who's the great-great-grandson of H.H. Holmes, who, of course, was America's first serial killer. We met Beth as a result of our collaboration with Jeff, and she actually has been working very closely with Jeff on further unraveling the mystery of Holmes.
Beth Deering uses her unique gifts to help the grieving and those who have had traumatic experiences. She works with veterans and first responders, guiding them through the problems like PTSD and substance abuse. But that's not all. Beth also assists law enforcement in the investigation of cold case homicides and missing person cases. Mehul, have you ever been involved in a case where a psychic was used?
You know, kind of. A number of years ago, I'd say circa 2008, I was the director of a private forensic DNA testing laboratory, and I was working with some producers on a TV show that centered around the use of psychics in criminal investigations. And the way this worked was based on input from a particular psychic. They would go out and collect various pieces of evidence and DNA samples from individuals and send them to me to test. And I can recall working late nights and weekends to try to get DNA results to meet the production schedule. But alas, at least for this particular psychic and this particular project, it just seemed like the psychic couldn't get it right based on the DNA results.
Well, as Beth will tell us, not all psychics are alike, and it sounds like she has provided some very valuable help to her law enforcement colleagues. Mehul, do you think it's somehow ridiculous for cops to turn to psychics when they hit a dead end?
Oh, no, not at all, Dion. I mean, you've got to get creative when you're investigating these cold cases. And I mean, look at the barriers that are being smashed down with the use of genetic genealogy DNA testing in criminal investigations. I mean, people are going full bore before the regulations were set in stone, before all of the privacy issues were addressed. And even just a few years ago, it might have seemed ludicrous or even impossible to try to use DNA in this way.
I'm just throwing it out there for our listeners' consideration. But as you will soon hear, we had a few weird things happen during our interview with Beth. Enjoy our conversation and hit us up on social media to discuss your thoughts on psychics and crime.
Beth, how are you? We're so excited that you could join us on our Crime Redefined podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you guys. I am so stoked to talk to you. I cannot wait to get started.
We're going to have you give us a little medium 101. So before we jump into the main part of our interview, I think it would be really helpful to have you define some terms for our listeners. And we're just going to go through them one at a time. Let's start with a psychic medium.
Okay, a psychic medium, let's start there, is a person that can read energies, they can sense situations, they can get a feel for the environment. A medium is one who can connect people to their loved ones on the other side. So I have the capability of doing both.
Fantastic. Okay, now how about a medical intuitive?
So a medical intuitive, as well as what I can also do, is I pick up on things that could be going awry with someone. I'm not a physician. I do not profess to be one, but our health is very, very significant. And I can pick up on deficiencies when somebody has maybe a vitamin deficiency or something that's going on physically with them. I can also pick up on physical sensations with them, and I'll start to describe a physical sensation. I actually had a gal that came to me from Virginia Beach about 2 years ago, and she had a reading, and I had written thyroid up on the left corner of her notes. I usually have about 10 or 15 pages of notes before somebody comes to visit, and I continue to do what's called automatic writing as I'm sitting there. And I had written thyroid over and over and over again, and she called me about 6 months after her session. And she says, I just want to thank you. And I said, for what? And she said, I think you saved my life. And I said, you're kidding. And she said, no. She said, I went to 6 endocrinologists. The 7th one I went to, I took my notes. He was a homeopathic physician. She says, who wrote this thyroid thing up here on your paper? And she said, it's this little medium I go to in Howard, Ohio. He said, well, that little medium probably saved your life. You're full of thyroid cancer, and you probably had 6 weeks if we hadn't checked one more test that these other gentlemen failed to test. So
that's really incredible.
It is an absolute incredible ability, and a lot of medical comes through during a session. It's kind of like a family reunion. Medical things come through, picking up on maybe potential jobs. I also do numbers. Numerology and numbers are very, very significant in the spirit world. Obviously, we have a whole chapter. We have a book in the Bible called Numbers. And I oftentimes will see many numbers before someone comes to sit in front of me, and then we'll look them up. There's a reference that I use to look up numbers. So I think we're just too busy in our everyday worlds of looking at our phone and taking things for granted that we really don't pay attention to maybe signs that people are having themselves. And lo and behold, they'll come to me and I'll pick up on certain things like that. But the medical aspect is one of the most significant things I think that I can help with people.
And then how about lastly, a paranormal investigator?
So a paranormal investigator, I also wear that hat, is that we go into haunted properties. Possibly could be someone's home. It could be a business. It could be a historical site that we go and investigate for paranormal activity or activity, as it were, that could be spiritually related. So we just look for ghosts when we do a paranormal investigation. And I got to get my adrenaline rush every now and then. And I love to do the investigations. And I've been to some incredibly haunted places, and I love every minute of it.
Well, Beth, let's kind of get to your origin story. Tell us about that day at Gettysburg when you were only 7 years old and you first discovered your special talents.
Absolutely. So back in the 70s, I was born in 62. So in the 70s, when I was a young kid, this was very taboo. Thank God people are more open to receiving what I do, and it's more prominent now, I think, due to a lot of the paranormal shows that are out there. And we as mediums, I came out of the medium closet, as it were, and we would go to these historic sites. I was an only child, and my mom and dad were very proper people. My dad loved history, and we would go to these wonderful sites, and we went to Gettysburg when I was 7 years old. And at the time, the Jenny Wade home was not notably haunted. It was not promoted as a haunted location. It was a historical site where the only civilian in Gettysburg, Jenny Wade, was killed by a sniper bullet in her kitchen as she was baking bread. And so we went to this place. As soon as we went in there, I was very antsy. I had a lot of nervous energy. I think I really disappointed my mom and dad. I wasn't a very well-behaved child that day. And I kept bothering the curator, the tour guide, to take me to the basement. And he says, why do you want to go to the cellar? And he corrected me. I didn't know a cellar from a basement at age 7. And I said, that's where they took her. And he said, they took who? And I said, the lady that lived here. So after all said and done, the other, people that were on the tour, they leave, and I was relentless. So this gentleman takes me to the back of the house with my mom and dad, opens up the cellar doors. We proceed to go down the steps to this cellar, and pretty much looks at my mom and dad, says like, okay, smarty pants, where did they put her? And I pointed in this direction, and I said, she's over there. And he looked at my parents and he said, there's no way in the world she would know that. That is exactly where they laid her body. We would go to historic places, Monticello, all these other museums, and it seemed like I would know more about the situation or the occurrence more so than the tour guide would, and started being old hat for me. And my mom and dad would, brush aside and go, what the heck is going on here, And I hid my gift for a long time because it wasn't, supposed to happen. It was misunderstood at the time. And now I think, like I said, it's more prevalent. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but wanted to finish that.
No, actually, that's what I want to build on. So was that the first time, or growing up, how did your special abilities manifest themselves?
So I actually believe that I had my first experience when I was 3, but I didn't understand the experience at the time. I had gone to a funeral of my cousins, and I've been very connected to the military for some reason for quite a few years. And I have been dubbed the medium to the military and first responders, which is a badge that I wear with honor. And he was a Marine, and he had died of a brain aneurysm. And it was the only funeral that I ever really recall anything going on. Even as an adult, I don't really recall any paranormal or unexplained situations happening. But I kept hearing his voice. And, my mom and dad looked at me, during this funeral, and I'm 3 years old. And I said, I hear Chuck. And my mom's like, well, how do you hear Chuck? He's in heaven. And I'm like, I don't know, Mom, I hear Chuck. And I vaguely remember that. But by the age of 10, 11, and by the time I was 12, I was seeing full-blown apparitions. We always lived in historically significant homes. My parents were Chip and Joanna Gaines before there was a Chip and Joanna Gaines. My dad sold real estate, and my mom decorated these beautiful properties. And I'm a firm believer in, if you start to renovate a property, oftentimes when you're renovating, you're stirring up the energy, you're stirring up activity. So we lived in quite a few haunted houses, and I would see spirits sitting at the end of my bed. People would think they were imaginary friends, but they were not imaginary to me. And we would always have supernatural experiences in a lot of the houses that we resided in when I was a kid.
And then how did you hone your paranormal talents as you going up from childhood to your teens and 20s? How did you perfect them?
So as a child and as a teenager and as a young adult, I kind of tried to hide it because I still didn't really understand what it was. And then finally, as I grew older, I just finally embraced it. I wore many hats, but always felt spirit around me, always was very heightened with my sensitivities and my intuitiveness. And when I started to embrace it, it just became more and more prevalent that this was what I was supposed to do. And then 7 years ago, I actually had a near-death experience. They found a blood clot on my right lung that they can attribute to, I believe, an investigation that I had done. It wasn't anything demonic or dark. It was just a very tragic incident in Newark, Ohio in 1942 during World War II. This training mission went very awry, and the entire captain and crew were killed in a tragic plane accident in my hometown. And I started to investigate the properties that attributed to that. And really after that, I tell people it's as if my gift went from the black and white part of Wizard of Oz to Technicolor. It's whatever I went through in that near-death experience that I had when they did find my blood clot. They told me that I had a 2-hour window. And the gentleman that diagnosed my blood clot never touched me, never even examined me. And he looks at me and says, "You have a blood clot on your right lung." And my best friend had taken me to the emergency room, and she looks at me, and I literally raised my hands, and she says, "Beth, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm surrendering." I said, "What are they going to do for a blood clot? They can't operate." And she's like, "You're not going to die. There's no way God gave you this incredible gift that he's going to take you." And believe it or not, I was in the hospital for 10 days, and the day that they discharged me, I told them, described the doctor to them, and they said, "Beth, we do not have anybody by that description or that name working here." I truly believe my guardian angel detected my blood clot.
And you think that the cause of the clot was directly from, I guess, a spiritual
accident. I do. Yeah. I truly believe that. They have no reason to disbelieve that now. Thank God they're open. I actually go Monday for my blood work. I'm on Coumadin, which I'm very holistic and don't want to be on any type of medication. But the very first encounter that I ever had after my initial first checkup that I had when I go and get my blood work done, the blood pressure cuff literally rolled across the floor to the nurse, and she looked at me and she went, "Oh, I've heard about you." And I'm like, "Yeah." I cannot go into stores. I set off store alarms, car alarms, clocks go backwards when I walk in a room. I've never been able to wear a watch. I'm nightmarish with any type of electronical equipment, computers. That's why Chris is here to assist me, because I crash computers. I go pay my bills, and the AT&T guys are like, can you just start paying your bills online? Because every time you come in here to pay your cell phone bill, our computers are down for 2 or 3 days.
That's a great segue into my next question, which is, can you turn the connection to the spiritual world on and off? Or are you just a receiver and hearing things all the time or seeing things all the time?
That is a great question. I try to live a normal life as normal can be for me, but it's pretty well, that beacon's on pretty well 24/7. If I get a couple hours night sleep, that's a good night for me. I have just never been able to sleep as a child, and it's just something that you learn to live with and deal with. And everybody says, I cannot believe you're like the Energizer Bunny the next day. You look so refreshed. But it's just something that you learn to manage, and I embrace it, and I've accepted what I do, and I truly believe that it is a gift, and I honor the gift that I was given, and I embrace what I do now. I love what I do.
So that means that you just have learned to kind of, I guess maybe dampen it a little bit. Like, let's say you're out and you're talking to us right now, or you're out for dinner somewhere, and you're able to just, like, kind of put it in the back of your mind so you can, otherwise I guess I'm having a visual in my head that just, all these people are screaming, wanting to come through.
Absolutely. You just need to turn it down and to focus on the present moment. And then when you're on, you're on.
So, Beth, I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of go into the wheelhouse of our podcast. And I'm curious to hear about the very first time you walked into a police station to attempt to assist detectives with either like a cold case or a missing persons case. And I'm wondering how you were received and how you were able to eventually have a rapport with law enforcement to help them out.
And for them to kind of trust you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I tell people, they ask, do you do cold case homicides, missing persons? And I always tell a prospective client, if you want me to become involved in a case, to please notify their local law enforcement. I never reach out directly. I always have someone do that on my behalf. But I happen to get the most incredible gentleman that I work with exclusively. We've been having this relationship for about 7 years now, and he is a phenomenal officer as well as a paranormal investigator. So he gets me. But I had this entity kept visiting me over and over and over again. And I kept describing this woman. I kept describing this crime scene to one of my clients in the area of where I reside. And she says, I think that I know who's coming through to you. I think that you need to go talk to some officers in that county to see if maybe you're picking up on something. So lo and behold, she had set up an appointment for me to go talk to the sheriff's department. And I met with these 2 officers and walked into this interrogation room, and they've obviously never spoke to a medium, and they were just as uncomfortable as I was to sit in front of them. And I started to describe this woman, her physical attributes, her name, situation, and things like that. And all of a sudden, they both looked at me and they said, has the room just dropped about 10 or 15 degrees in temperature? And I said, yes, that's typical. And I said, I believe she's here. And the one officer looks at me and he says, hold on a second. He says, I have to make a phone call. There's somebody that needs to be privy to this conversation. He's right in your wheelhouse. He's going to totally understand where you're coming from. He's one of our best officers, and he loves this kind of stuff. And he also is a paranormal investigator. He said, let's bring him in. So he brings in this officer, and as soon as he sits down in front of me, he immediately knew she was in the same room. And he even asked me, he said, Beth, is she here? And I said, yes, absolutely is. So we go on these great adventures together for fun, but in all seriousness, we do cold case homicides and missing persons cases together. And we use not only my physical abilities, but we also use paranormal equipment, recorders. We can get EVPs, and there's no better person to tell you who committed the crime than the victim themselves.
So, Beth, I think you sort of answered this already, but I'm curious to hear more about when you're working a case. Take us through the mechanics of how exactly you go about assisting law enforcement.
So usually what they will do, they'll put me, like what they did the very first time I started working with these officers, they put me in an unmarked car and they would take me around to either locations where a crime had been committed or just a general location. And that's kind of what they did for me to test me. And I completely understand that. There's a lot of people out there to profess to have a gift. And that's the last thing that I ever want to do is waste an officer's time. They have time is money. Time is very significant in an investigation, especially a cold case or a missing person. And there are many people that are waiting, for information to be handed over. So I basically go in as cold can be. And when we do get to a location, I will just hone in on my skills. I might start to see something, feel something, hear something. And that's something maybe I can tell your audience as well, gentlemen, is some mediums are clairvoyant or they're clairaudient, where they're all knowing, where they see things or they hear. I've been given the ability that I use all of my senses. So I hear, feel, see, smell, and taste. I taste physical things that aren't here, but are for me physically in the spirit world, or it could be something that someone had. It could have been a sickness. It could have been something pertaining to a medication. Prime example is if I taste metal, that's a gunshot for me. So I also am empathic, where I can pick up on physical sensations of those that are currently residing here, the living, as well as those that have crossed over. So basically, it's almost like a movie in my head where I see things, I see scenes, I see maybe something happening, or oftentimes if I go to a location, I might even be stepping back in time. And that's called a place memory, where something has occurred there, but I see it. Could have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 100 years ago. And I see it being reenacted in my mind. I hope that explains it.
Yes, absolutely. I've got a follow-up question to that. And this is just my scientific mind thinking. Typical tools, conventional tools for law enforcement investigation, there's a lot of calibration, controls. I'm thinking of like a drug dog. There's proficiency tests, all of that kind of stuff. Do you have anything similar to that to just make sure that, your, that what you're feeling is correct, or it's, you're not rusty or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. If I go into a situation and I might even start doing automatic writing, we also have people that can back up what I'm picking up on, that they will start to actually investigate names. Say a name comes to mind, or I'll hear something, that these officers will go ahead and in fact take the evidence that I'm providing, or hopefully information that I'm providing, and they have very thoroughly researched things to make sure that they're accurate.
That's I don't know if I'm listening to this going kind of like losing my train of thought, going, this is really amazing stuff. Are there any success stories that you can share regarding your work with law enforcement?
Sure. We actually are working on a case right now. It's very close to hopefully coming to an end for a young lady that was murdered several years ago. I've been given some updates on that one. There's been a couple other missing persons that have been closed cases that we were able to do. I'm currently working on about 6 to 8 active cases right now, and a lot of them are very nationally known cases that we're working exclusively with.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was just reading about a case in Kentucky where a psychic had predicted that, the law enforcement would find a missing teen safe in a neighboring county the very next day. And sure enough, they were right. So I'm wondering, in the big picture of things, how common is it that law enforcement brings in a psychic on a case?
That's a great question, and I'm very thrilled to be able to work with law enforcement. I don't think it's used that much. I feel like I'm pretty exclusively used, and oftentimes I'm hoping that maybe other agencies might start looking in that area, for assistance. But, I tell people, I never approach the law enforcement agency. I always have someone do it on my behalf, or even have an agency contact me personally. But I'm a firm believer, and I think it's a great tool to use.
It's funny because you'd think that with all the exposure that more and more law enforcement is just part of their law enforcement investigation toolkit would, give this a shot. Hello? Hello? You dropped her. Hello? Hello?
Beth, we lost your audio, Beth.
You here? Can you hear me?
Hey, you're back. You're back.
Hey, Connie. You guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you now. You just dropped out for about 20 seconds.
No problem. It's probably spirit. This happens all the time.
Right, there you go. Perfect.
There's some good validation there.
Well, Beth, I was going to edit that out, but now I'm going to leave that in.
I love it. It's somebody's wanting to get our attention here.
Yeah.
I'm a nightmare to I love doing interviews, but probably the people that are interviewing me are going, oh my gosh, here we go again.
Well, Beth, when you hear our next line of questioning, you're going to hear why maybe there was a disruption. So go for it, Dion.
All right, here we go. We're going to change lanes again, and we want you to tell us, tell our listeners how and why you sought out Jeff Mudgett.
Oh my goodness!
Dun-dun.
I figured Holmes is hanging around. Wow, what an incredible story! So
let it fly.
I have a little podcast called The Acoustic Shadow, and it's a little paranormal show that I do. Haven't been able to do it. I've been on a huge hiatus with work and haven't had time, but I love doing the show. And one July afternoon, 4th of July weekend, I love Jeff Mudgett. He's my hero. I have admired his work. I loved America.
Hello?
Holmes, back off, man. We're trying to do a podcast here. Beth, we lost you.
So I reached out to Jeff.
Yeah, Beth, can you hear
me?
Yeah, can you backtrack a little bit? We lost you again.
Hello?
Are you there?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we got you now.
Hello?
Okay.
You weren't
Can you hear
kidding,
me
were
okay?
you? You weren't kidding about this stuff,
I
were
know,
you?
right? I'm telling you, he's here. I'm telling you. So I reached out to Jeff and I sent him a Facebook. First of all, I sent him a friend request and I was a nervous wreck doing it. And I thought, oh my gosh, it would be so awesome if he accepts my friend request. And he did. And I sent him a message and I said, I've admired your work. I love the Holmes story. I said, I would be honored if you would do our radio show, The Acoustic Shadow. When can I do it? And I'm like, oh my gosh. So lo and behold, we did the interview. Connie Zollers is my assistant on the show. And we had this phenomenal interview with Jeff Mudgett and got into the meat and potatoes of H.H. Holmes, America's first serial killer. And I firmly believe he's Jack the Ripper. I'm beyond convinced that he is. And that weekend he calls and he says, I'm going to send you an autographed copy of my book, Bloodstains. And he writes inside the front cover, as soon as I opened it up, handle with care, which I loved when he wrote that. And I looked at that man looking up at me and immediately became nauseated, headache, energy, like there's no energy I have ever felt in my lifetime that this gentleman projects. And I hear clear as I'm talking to you, I want you to do what's called the dissection of bloodstains.
I want to have you kind of expand on that and take us through your feelings when you first saw the cover of Jeff's book. Put us in the room of when you say you open it up and you read the book, you see the book cover, of Bloodstains, and then what were your emotions as you were reading it?
So I opened up this beautiful package that he sent me, and there is the face of H.H. Holmes staring up at me, and I'm holding this book, and it's almost like it's a surreal moment, like we're looking at one another, and I became very nauseated. I became dizzy, almost lethargic, just kind of like out of it for a minute, because the energy was so intense. And it wasn't within a few seconds that I audibly started hearing this gentleman talking to me. And he says, you need to write down the book, your interpretation, and I want you to call it The Dissection of Bloodstains. And I thought, oh my goodness, okay. So immediately I start getting a notebook. I could not put the book down. And the very first night that I had received the book, I probably read for 3 or 4 hours. And I put the book aside and I crawl into bed and I had my back faced toward my hall and there's a bathroom that's right across from my bedroom. And it's about 2:00 in the morning. And believe you me, if I'm scared of something, you better be on my heels because I have a real high tolerance of things that I can handle. But I felt this gentleman staring at me. I could feel the weight of his stare. And I hear audibly, roll over. And I knew what to expect. I knew he was going to be standing there. It didn't surprise me in the least. And I roll over in bed, and there in the silhouette of my doorway, my door frame, is a gentleman about 5'8", 5'9", tops, baller hat. He has on what he called a waistcoat. He corrected me. I said, yes, I see you standing there in your camel-colored suit. And he says, oh, no, my dear, it's a waistcoat and trousers. And he disappeared. That was my introduction.
Well, okay, so that was 6 or 7 months ago, say.
Yes.
How about today? Do you even today still feel like you sense the presence of H.H. Holmes?
If he is not around me every day, it's every other day. And he has learned when I work, I have a reading probably, if not a group or a reading, just about every day. I work 7 days a week. So if I do not have a client during the day, I feel him more intently than I do if I do have a client. But he's learned to work around my schedule. But to be quite honest with you, gentlemen, I feel him pretty much every single day. When I know he's around, oftentimes, and Jeff can attest to this, when we started working together on this little project of H.H. Holmes, I called him one afternoon and I said, I know he's hanging around today. I said, my whole house smells like chloroform.
Are you? I mean, this would freak me out. I mean, are you getting comfortable with this kind of presence being around you now?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I am totally comfortable with him being around. I'm not frightened of him. I respect him, but I'm not frightened. Jeff messaged me the very next day and he says, verbatim what you just said. He goes, you are creeping me out. He said, I got up this morning and I smelled chloroform.
Oh, man.
I said, yeah, he's hanging around.
Jeff believes that the evidence shows that the body in the grave of H.H. Holmes is actually somebody else. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, I cannot agree more. I did not buy that at all. I totally believe he is the man is brilliant. He loves to play what I call cat and mouse games. He's like a riddler. And when he sets me up to listen to more and more clues on a daily basis, he might show me something else or talk about something. And he is a genius. There is absolutely no way that that's him buried there. I'm convinced of that.
Well, Beth, of course, H.H. Holmes was America's first serial killer. And Jeff Mudgett, at least as far as we can tell, is not a serial killer. And I'm familiar with the gene monoamine oxidase A, or MAOA, which has to do with neurotransmitters, and I understand is associated with antisocial behavior and possibly linked to criminality. What are your thoughts on an actual genetic predisposition for murder?
Oh, my goodness. I think it's very much there. I've done a lot of research since I started hanging out with Holmes, as it were, on like you're talking about the DNA structure of a serial killer, and they exhibit certain traits and things like that, common links, common personality types. I'm a firm believer that not only are they born, they're also made, but I think that there might be a predisposition, but I'm also a firm believer and there's possibly something supernatural that connects them.
I'm not a geneticist, but I want to ask you about a more hypothetical type of a DNA. Could there be a spiritual DNA that is passed between serial killers?
I totally believe that. Yes, I do.
So can you elaborate on that? Because we're not talking now about a physical gene or a physical piece of DNA. So we're using DNA loosely, but how would you describe a quote, spiritual DNA that would be flowing through these people?
So interesting enough that you would ask that. During my little, I guess my project, as it were, my adventure that Mr. Holmes has taken me on, he has shown me quite a few things. And I have a artist that I work with exclusively, and she has pretty well put to paper and pen what I visualize in my head. And over the summer, it was maybe a couple of months after Holmes and I became acquainted, that he actually took me to San Francisco, and I had her draw this San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, and he had me look at this mist above it. And he says, that's not fog, my dear. He says, that's the spirit that lingers even after I've passed. And he said, the great ones have had that. He said, Dahmer, Bundy, and Gacy were good. but they were caught. So I started to really put in perspective what he was trying to tell me. And I truly believe what he is trying to tell me is this dark entity, supernatural being, has entered these gentlemen. And I have been working in this field for quite a long time, and I really believe that I'm pretty knowledgeable on what I talk about. And I am convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that there is a supernatural link between serial killers.
I have a question about some of the equipment that you use in your work. And so, for example, on your Facebook page, your profile pic appears to be some sort of device with green and red lights on it. What exactly is that?
So that's an EMF reader, and it will pick up on any type of electrical energy that something might be projecting. And we usually take that into an area where, say, there isn't any electricity, so there wouldn't be any cross-contamination or any electric at all involved. And I have a great story to share with you where that picture was taken. I don't put my picture on Facebook because I do a lot of undercover work, but people know what I look like when they come to see me. But that particular picture was taken at a very haunted location in Lancaster, Ohio, and it's now an event center. But when I went to investigate it, it used to be a bar, and the gentleman had called me in regards to wanting me to come and investigate to see if he had any activity there. And he said that the history of the building was an old feed mill, and a gentleman in 1920 by the name of Luke, unfortunately at 19, lost his life, that he fell through the rafters in the feed mill and was killed. And he said, "You're more than welcome to come visit the restaurant bar. I can open it up a couple hours early before the clientele come in." And I said, "Absolutely, I'm all for it. Let's check it out and see if there's anything there." And as we're walking up to the second level, where I would describe it as like a pool hall environment, he had pool tables and video games and jukeboxes. And mind you, there were no lights on upstairs. And as I started to climb up the steps, the lights started coming on as each step that I was taking, as if I was being guided up there. And by the time I got to the top of the steps, the jukeboxes were blasting, the pinball machines were binging, and you could hear like the sound of cue balls hitting, on a pool table. And I looked at him and I said, "That's fantastic." And he goes, "Yeah, you don't know how fantastic." He said, "Nothing's plugged in, and most of this stuff hasn't worked in 20 years.
Wow,
So
that's incredible.
Definitely had some activity there.
You know what, Beth, I want to go backwards for a second. I just had a thought about the use of psychics in criminal investigation. Are you aware of any situations where a psychic has had to testify in court and how that went in terms of acceptance of the evidence or, those type of issues?
No, I'm not. But I think something like that should be admissible. I really do. I think there's a lot of credibility, especially if they have a resume and especially if their work's documented. I wouldn't know why someone wouldn't want to use something like that. So that would be a fantastic thing to see. I would love for something like that to happen one day.
Well, and to that end, are there certain organizations or professional bodies that would put a stamp of approval on a psychic and just to let the public know that they've reached a certain criteria or passed muster?
I know a lot of them go to, I haven't, I'm just self-taught and trained. I do know a lot of other mediums, they go to learn certain, skill sets and things like that. I've never done anything like that and have no certification from any, university or institute or anything like that. But I do know there are some mediums that do have certifications in certain things. I've never done anything like that, but I think it's a fascinating field, and I tell people, please research who you go to. There are so many people out there that profess to have a gift that are legitimately con artists, in my opinion. And I tell people, you investigate your plumber, you investigate your physician, your attorneys. If this person cannot give you credible validations, credible resume, credible other people that have come to see them, a clientele, and I have a huge clientele, and I'm very grateful for that, then you really need to maybe not go visit them. They should have a body of work that they're able to present to you when you come sit in front of them.
You know, that's really good advice, because people will, you're right, they'll scrub their architect or a plumber or something like that, but then maybe a medium walks in the door and they're like, oh yeah, it's great, without doing any kind of scrub or research on them before they walk into their home.
Absolutely.
You know, with that, Beth, we want to thank you. It was really an amazing conversation. We really appreciate your time today. I have to say, I'm a little creeped out, and we may be doing this recording again, because I got a feeling Holmes was here, and we may have a blank recording of this. Hopefully not.
Wow. I'm freezing cold as you just said that, by the way, so that's very cool. It doesn't surprise me.
Well, thank you so much, Beth. That was really, really fascinating and informative. And it was great talking to you. And I would like to just close by saying, if H.H. Holmes is messing up our podcast, we don't appreciate it. And, we're not scared of you. Wow. I have to say that was a very cool peek into the world of psychics. Beth is a real pro. And, to me, she really seems to ooze both responsibility in her craft as well as credibility.
I couldn't agree more, and I was so transfixed with her story and couldn't believe the response she had to Jeff's book, Bloodstains. Beth and Jeff working together to research the Holmes curse and other aspects of Holmes really is a dynamic duo.
Yeah, I agree. They certainly are. It seems like the use of psychics by law enforcement really is gaining traction. And hey, you know what? Why the hell not use any tool available? And I hope that we can talk to Beth again down the line when some of these high-profile cases she mentioned she's working on are actually adjudicated, so we can hear the details.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so how about the, quote, technical glitch that occurred just before we started with the questions on Holmes? Coincidence or haunting?
That's a punt. I'm punting on this one, Dion. As a scientist, I got to use that dreaded phrase, inconclusive. And I know damn well it's a cop-out, but I am curious to hear what our listeners will have to say about that on social media.
So you're not going to co-sign on that, huh?
No, sir.
I thought you were a little braver. All right, so check out Beth's podcast, Acoustic Shadow, on iTunes, iHeartRadio, and all the usual podcast destinations. You can also connect with Beth on our Facebook page. And go there and take a look at that picture of the EMF reader Beth described. It's pretty cool. A huge thanks to our listeners and social media followers. We hope you enjoyed Beth's interview as much as we did. Please be sure to subscribe to Crime Redefined. Don't miss an episode. We are just getting warmed up for 2020. Today's episode of Crime Redefined was sponsored by MBA DNA Consulting, LLC, located in downtown Los Angeles. Renowned forensic DNA consultant Mehul B. Anjaria bridges science and law by helping his attorney and inmate clients with complicated DNA issues in criminal and civil cases with the highest stakes. Check out mbadnaconsulting.com for more information and follow on Twitter at MBA DNA Consult. If you are interested in sponsoring a future episode of Crime Redefined, please email us at contact@zerocliffmedia.com or through social media.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.